Good morning. I don't think it's on. There it goes. Good morning. Thank y'all so much for coming to this 10 o'clock combined Sunday school hour. I encouraged everyone to come all day long. We've got some good people that are going to be here all day long. Patsy, thank you for coming. We're so grateful that I'm sure you go every single place and do the smile and greet everybody. And the Willimons actually hosted me for a Duke basketball game one time with friends. I'm obsessive about getting to a game early and watching the whole thing unfold. And I don't mean 10 minutes early, I mean 45 minutes early. The one instance that I wasn't early and wasn't concerned about it was when we were eating tacos with Bishop Willimon, and he was telling stories, and I thought, you know what, this is one time we'll get to the game. That is the only time, so that should mean something to you. The only time and the only time I didn't care. Bishop Willimon's gracious enough to come to us. We've enjoyed your book. We've had a great time with it, and I'm going to get out of the way. I asked him to share fun things with us that he's learned as a bishop in churches that are thriving or doing interesting things for the community. And then I've got this microphone, thanks to Adam, to pass around if we have any questions. So as he's given us remarks, if you'll think of a question that you could ask him, we'll have till about 20 till, where we'll go get ready for the 11 o'clock service. Bishop Willimon.
Thank you, Bill. Mm-hmm. Great to be here at this historic and thriving congregation. When Joe invited me, he said, and we'll put you up in Greer, and you won't have to sleep on the floor like you made me do it when I was at your house. We had an inflatable mattress, but still it was the floor. It was great to be back in Greer and have lots of friends here. And Joe asked me to talk about what I had observed among churches that thrive, specifically United Methodist churches. So I'd like to identify a few characteristics and have you think about Memorial and some of your challenges. First, to sort of set the context in which we have this discussion, the median age of United Methodist is about 61 right now. That's actually lower than like Presbyterian, Episcopalian. However, you don't need to be a math whiz to note that any organization with a median age that high has got some real challenges. A student of mine is graduated and is in a large church in North Carolina and as associate pastor, and he says each Sunday I sit there and I look out on the congregation and we're filled and there's a sense of doing well, but I realize that at least half to two-thirds of everybody I'm looking at will not be there in 10 years. We're a graying denomination, and so that's a challenge. In fact, Lovett Weems says that we are going to be hit by a phrase he invented, the death tsunami, in about a decade. And that decisions we make now about what kind of congregation we are, we will pay dearly if those decisions are not made well. So that gives a sense of urgency to what we're doing. And it's kind of hard for a church. You know, this building is built to look about 300 years older than it really is. Churches do that, and there's a kind of eternal quality about the church. But it's not. In fact, one of the truths about congregations is churches either grow or they die. I go into many churches and they say, well, we're not really growing, but we're holding our own. You know, no, you can't. Churches either take in new life, they either relate to new generations, or they decline and die. Half to two-thirds of all the Methodist churches in South Carolina have not made a new Christian in the last 3 years. All of those churches are dying. It can take a while for that to happen, but just to say, for the church, we have some stark truths. But more than that, it's not just because any organization that ages and does not take in new life ends up in trouble. I think it's also because of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ does not permit us to simply hunker down and say, don't we have a great group of people here? Let's enjoy it and have a good time. And as you know, Jesus did not do that. In one of my classes at Duke, I have students read through the Acts of the Apostles. And it's a mission class. And as they read through it, I ask them, what impresses you about church in Acts of the Apostles compared with church as you know it? And they start calling out things like no real estate. I said, that's interesting. We put a lot of real estate into real estate. There's no biblical justification for that. And they said, no program, no plans, no bishops. And I said, all right, that's enough. All right, I get your point. But there's just something inherent about the Christian faith that either you stay in motion with Jesus as he makes his continued invasion of the world, as he continues to reach out and bring in, or you as a church eventually stop being a church. And an additional factor that we're still struggling with is that when I was a very young Methodist in Greenville, South Carolina, if you were going to worship as a Protestant Christian, you had to do it when we said and how we said and where we said. Well, between then and now, we lost our monopoly. And suddenly churches had to start thinking, wow, people now have alternatives for worshiping Jesus Christ at different times and in different ways. Coming into Greer this morning, coming through Welford, I was impressed by how many new churches I saw. Now, they didn't look like this church, but they were in storefronts, and they right all the way down the highway into here. That's new. And that means that we're having to think differently. In fact, in thinking about these matters, in a sense, we're the first generation of church in a long time to have to think in these ways. I was in a church in Alabama that is growing well, and I went to sort of observe the staff at work and see what I could learn about growth. And when I pulled in the parking lot, there were signs up there. One of the signs said, reserved for parents with young children. That was a reserved sign there, and they had a whole bunch of them. I went in. I could easily find how to get to the church offices and all. Well, the staff was going over evaluations of the worship service from the previous Sunday. Evaluations sent in online by visitors. They said to me, if someone visits this church at least twice but doesn't join, we write them and say, we hope you found a congregation, and we thank you for visiting our church. Would you mind filling out this questionnaire? And if you do, here are 2 free steak dinners for you provided by one of our members. And please send it. And the pastor said, we take that questionnaire and we go over it line by line. And we ask visitors to evaluate our restrooms, the sermon, the music, the signage, everything. And I said to the lay leaders gathered there, do y'all know how very different this is? We're not in the same world we were in. And one of the challenges is, I most of us clergy don't have a lot of training in how to reach out, be outward, welcoming. I was in a church in North Carolina, and a woman said, my husband and I took everything we had saved in Ohio, and we moved here to Hickory, North Carolina, and opened up a wild bird store, wild bird seed store. And she said, one thing you quickly learn, we were trained to do this, but you're not selling bird seed. You're selling hospitality. You're selling friendship. You're selling adventure to the people who come in there. And she said, we find out the name of every single person who walks in our store within the first 3 or 4 minutes. And then we move to getting their address, their email address, and we say to them, we will, when the robins come through Hickory, we will let you know so you can be prepared, and when the goldfinches are out and this kind of thing. And she said that then during the week when we find out certain customers said, like, we've got customers who are in a nursing home, but they have 4 bird feeders there, and we call them and we deliver bird seed to them so they don't have to come to us. And her point was, I could teach this church how to be more welcoming to new people, how to reach out. And many of you, what I'm describing is another day at work for you. You're accustomed to welcoming new life, for telling people, giving them the information they need to participate in your business well, to feel at home. You get on a first name basis with them. You try to become friends to a certain degree. Well, I'm just saying those are new skills. Probably shouldn't have been, but new skills for the church to be learning today. All right, here's some observations for what they're worth about church's vital and all. Number one, the pastor's leadership is key. The pastor must be committed to growth and committed to giving this congregation a future, or it really just doesn't seem to happen. Luckily, you've got a pastor who's got more future than I do, and I urge you, think of ways to leverage a young-ish pastor. He graduated from the Citadel, but still, to utilize your pastor to give you a future. And your pastor is committed. He was telling me as we were preparing, he said, my goal is to move beyond being the hardworking young boy to the strategic thinking leader of forward movement. Wow, surely you understand what a gift it is to have a pastor that thinks like that. We had a consultant in at a church I was serving not too long ago, and the consultant said, after sitting down with our staff and studying what we were doing and not doing, he said, sadly, your staff does not have skills for how you grow a church. They have skills only for maintaining what's there. And he said, even more sad, they all appear to have a theology which says that's okay. One of your staff members was saying, well, here we don't do a lot of evangelism and all. What we do is we try to have quality programs here. And we try to get really committed people to be here. The consultant said, well, I don't think there's any biblical justification for that being ministry, but okay. He said, let me just tell you as an outsider, you have no quality programs operating right now. Secondly, I can tell by the giving in this congregation, the attendance in this congregation, you don't have deeply committed people. In fact, you've kind of got the people whose probably commitment is so low that they will put up with the low quality. Well, you're blessed with another kind of pastoral leader, and that is the key. And I hope you will really utilize that in your life here. A second observation, and that's related to what I'd said earlier, but a key distinction in a church is outward, inward. Outward, inward. There are powerful forces that force a church to look inward, to say, well, we're happy. Things are going the best they've ever gone. There's less conflict. We're all happy and all. Well, unfortunately, with Jesus Christ, that's not good enough. And it's so easy. I remember visiting a church that was in precipitous decline, and I was going down there to try to be a visitor, see what I could do to assess things. It's pouring rain. I run up to the door closest to the parking lot in the rain. It's locked. So then I run to another door. It's locked. There are a couple of men standing on the porch of the church laughing at me, and one of them said, "Everybody knows that door would never open." I said, I can now go back to Birmingham. I've learned everything I know about why you're dying. Yeah, it's that. It's the door. It's so typical to kind of evaluate ourselves inward rather than outward, rather than ask newcomers, visitors and all, what's your impression of us? Generally, every church thinks it's friendly and loving, because it is friendly and loving for those of us who are here and know each other's names. And that inward-outward thing, it deals with signage. It deals with the doors that are open. Name tags. Go in a large church. I was in a super large church, the biggest Methodist church, a couple of weeks ago out in Kansas, and they have name tags. And they said, the name tags are not only important because we've gotten so big, it's just hard for people to know many people, but also the name tags are kind of a signal. We expect visitors. We're going to have visitors. Visitors are not a surprise to us. And we're organizing ourselves. And it is interesting how we'll say things like, I know with welcomers and hosts, we'll sometimes report, we'll see people out and welcome people, say, welcome to our church. And they said, I've been a member of this church 30 years. And, that's your problem. That's and for the church to get over that. I had a man that had no real connection. He had been connected with the church years ago. He hadn't been in the church in a long time after a divorce he went through and everything. And so I was talking to him, and he said, I don't know nothing about the Bible. I'm not that good. I just, a lot that goes on, I just don't understand. I don't get much out of the sermons and all. And I asked him to be a greeter. He's a banker. He greets for a living all week long. And there he is up and down the steps, hand out, hello, hello. And he says, it's great because I haven't been in that church in 20 years, so I don't know anybody. So everybody looks like a visitor to me. And, finding people with those gifts and being the sort of church which says church starts in the parking lot. The whole church experience begins there. How do we come across as welcoming? I had a banker tell me that American banking had radically changed on the basis of the front doors. He said, remember when banks used to have a big steel front door with plated, and the idea was, you bring us your money, nobody can get in here. Your money is safe. Well, at some point, American banking, he said, we started having glass doors where you could see inside and you could see out. And we put up a coffee urn there, and there were donuts. And he said that was a huge change in our definition of who we are. Looking at Memorial, very typical. You have a very small entranceway, narthex. Well, when this church was built, everybody coming to this church was in Greer. And you saw each other all week long. You shopped together. You were in school together. Well, there wasn't any need for name tags or meeting people. There wasn't any need for working on the welcoming at the front. A few years ago, the Catholic bishops issued a statement on church architecture decreeing that in new Catholic churches, the entrance hall had to be at least a third as big as the sanctuary. And the entrance hall ought to have living room furniture and a coffee urn and be warm and be the kind of place where everybody does everything they need to do to come in and worship God together. And so a big challenge for our churches who are older, and most of our churches are older, a big challenge has been to get the entrance, the front door, to sort of say to the world what you want to say. And I think I would add one more thing, and that is your pastor and indeed all your church staff, what is their function to serve you, to service you, or to help you be in ministry and mission to others? I've seen churches where the pastor will say, we have a wonderful ministry with the homeless and those in need. I spend about 15 hours a week working in those ministries. I said, I don't think you ought to spend 1 hour a week doing that. That's not your job. Your job is to equip the saints. Read Ephesians. Your job is to get them equipped to do that ministry. That's not your ministry. Your ministry is to lead this congregation, not do that work. And one thing we required in Alabama was when a pastor moved, we had the pastor come up with the first 90-day plan. And in that first 90-day plan, got the idea from a business book. And the first 90-day plan was everything you would do your first 90 days, every day, so that at the end of that first 90 days, you would be the pastoral leader of that congregation. Who do you need to talk to? What do you need to do? What stories do you need to hear? What information what skills do you need to develop you didn't need in your last church? And that plan was developed with the leadership of the receiving church, and took a couple of months to put together before the pastor moved, so that when the pastor moved, everybody, and it was published so that everybody in the church knew what their pastor would be doing. And I went in one church where they were negotiating about this, and so the pastor said, well, I've had some conversations, and the first thing I'm going to do is to visit all the members in this church who are homebound, our older homebound members. That's my first priority. Well, fortunately, a layperson said, how did you decide that was the most important thing we needed you to do here? I would think that'd be our job, because a lot of us can't preach or lead Bible studies and all, but we can sure do that. I'm just curious how you decided. And so the pastor said, well, there's a lot of resentment among our older members. They feel neglected. They feel put on the shelf. The layperson said, well, they're sucking Social Security dry. I mean, what else do they need from? And I'm thinking, wow, this is an interesting layperson here. And so I said to the layman, well, if you don't like that priority, what do you think ought to be your new pastor's priority? And he said, I'd love to see our new pastor have a face-to-face conversation with every single person in this congregation who's under 30. He said, it won't take that long, because we ain't got that many. But he said, I think that would do more to educate us, to focus us on what we need. And, well, that's, I think, the kind of thinking we've got to do for the future. Let me stop there and just see if this touches off any observations in you or any pushback or this. I can say more, but I'm sure I can score my points in the discussion. So
no one loves to speak into a microphone, but it'll help everyone else hear.
What suggestions do you have for those of us in the congregation to make sure that we recognize visitors and greet them properly?
I think it just helps to everybody get kind of focused that we need visitors. And the way I understand visitors run is for every 10 visitors, only one will ever join your congregation. So you got to have a steady flow. But I think little things like having the right people welcoming. Had a church in Tuscaloosa that had 50 trained people in the congregation, vetted. You couldn't just volunteer. You had to be interviewed to see, how you're first, how you come across and extroverted or whatever. But they had, as I remember, they had like greeters. The greeters worked the parking lot. Then the greeters hand off visitors to the welcomers. The welcomers say, oh, good to have you. How about sitting with us during the service? And if you have any questions, And then the welcomers also were encouraged to go to lunch afterwards with these visitors. And they had these statistics to show that if somebody is greeted and welcomed and taken to lunch, 75% of the time they join our church. They said that we've never seen anything like this. Follow up afterwards, follow up by the pastor, very important. A lot of people say, mostly pastors say this, about people don't want to be visited. They don't like you to intrude. That can be true, particularly among some young adults, but generally, it's important for people to see how a pastor uses time, what's a priority. So I think of those things. Again, I bet there are people here who have built up businesses on the basis of welcoming and friendliness. And I go to a couple of businesses in Durham, and I'm thinking when I'm in there, I'm paying more for this than I would have to pay at Walmart. However, I'm actually having a conversation here. This person knows my name. But that's the right question to ask. And I'd wonder that, again, Greer, I wonder how many people are attracted to moving to Greer and all, because they love this sort of traditional, small town kind of atmosphere. And it's interesting, a lot of churches have created contemporary worship to focus on younger people. Then they find out they got more younger people in the traditional service and more older people who've been up since dawn in the contemporary. I don't know how it plays out here, but that's yeah.
This is a little question.
Yeah.
Statement?
Yeah.
I don't need the microphone.
Of course you do. This is the only time I'm going to tell you what to do.
I met you 50 years ago.
Yeah.
You've changed a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
You and Tommy Duncan came to my house to see my daughter when
Oh, really?
you were at Wofford. And I've thought about that ever since Joe told me you were coming.
That's wonderful. I remember that visit. I have matured a lot since then, though. I've been to the Presbyterian Church at Greer a couple of times, and every time I go, there's always someone who says, we can't believe that one of Ronnie Bruce's good friends is trying to tell us what to do. Said, you know you're suspect. And Joe found it necessary to say, I just slept on the floor at his house. I don't know him that well. So whatever he says. But, yeah, thank you. Again, it's a blessing you have. You're in a high-growth area. And when I go back to Greenville and people say, well, we're hoping to move to Greer because we want to be in a new young neighborhood. And I'm thinking, wow, Greer has really been the beneficiary of a lot of growth and change. What would it take? You're having in Susan White, to do an analysis. Sarah White, thank you, Sarah White, to do an analysis of your community and actually who's out there, who do you have the best chance of connecting with. That's a wonderful thing to do, and a wonderful way to realize that this growth is a gift that a lot of churches would give anything to have, and you're getting it.
As you were talking, it got me to thinking that the many churches I have visited and been a part of, the difference in the hospitable churches and the inhospitable churches has been whether or not on a Sunday morning they were trying to do business with one another, that, I need to see so-and-so because of this, or whether they did that during the week, and on Sunday morning, their attention was on the visitors. Does that ring true for you as well?
Interesting. I would say that you could be a great resource to the congregation in saying, of the many churches I've visited and all, many of us have not had that much church experience and visited. You have. So when we had our consultant in, he said to us, if anybody joins this church, among the instructions you should give them about becoming a Methodist is, we want you to bring somebody similar to you to visit our church. We want you to call the pastor and say, this woman I work with, I'm going to have with me at church Sunday, so the pastor will be tipped off and can focus on that. And then he said, by the way, and he was talking to our church council. He said, nobody in this room will probably be able to help with this. He said, because you're all of the median age, how many of you have made a new friend in the last 4 or 5 years? He said, 70-year-olds don't do that generally. And he said, the greatest chance you have of attracting new life is with your newest members. So I think your observations would be great and better than mine. I visited a lot of churches, but usually when I visit, I'm a guest that's been brought in, and so I'm welcomed. Although Betsy and I'd be amazed how many churches we'd visit that I'm the bishop, and we weren't welcomed. I remember the church I visited, it was just exploding up in Madison, Alabama. And when I got there, the pastor said to me, hey, I'm handing you off here to this layman. He'll be your host. He'll show you around and look after you. And because I'm working the parking lot, and good to have you. And good to go. Well, as the service began, and we start out, I look, and there's the pastor in the back of the church shaking hands and greeting and meeting people. And the service had been going on 10 minutes before the pastor finally came up there and joined us. And then at the end of the service, he said, great to have you. That was great. see you. And he ran out and was back in the park. Well, I kind of said, I know why this church is growing now. Priority being put on this. And the pastor is modeling, here's how you do things. And so.
There is a Jeep Cherokee in the parking lot with the tailgate up. Anybody have a black cherry, red Cherokee?
There's a really nice toolbox in the back. Something else on the front seat that I didn't know what it was.
Oh,
There's something strange in the front seat. Is this on?
Didn't want to, I just know there was.
Sure.
Wow.
We'll announce it again before worship. One more question, if we have one. Yes, sir.
In your observation of growing Methodist churches, what role, if any, has denomination played in it?
What role has the denomination played? From what I understand, generally, studies of church growth and decline show that denominational identity, theological orientation, being on the right or the left politically, those are not as big a factors as we first thought. I mean, theology means a lot to me, and it means a lot to you, and denominational identity means a lot to me. It's just for the average person, doesn't seem to be a big factor. What are big factors are, one, conflict in the congregation is a turnoff to new people. Conflicted congregations don't seem to attract new people. The kind of tone and atmosphere, friendliness and all seem to be a factor. I will say, though, one thing I discovered in Alabama was, in Alabama at least, if you're Methodist, we got a good brand, to put it crudely. And, some of them had said, if you want to attract young people, take the denominational identity off your sign. That's a turn off. People are now hostile to denominations or apathetic. In Alabama, though, it was a big... It was deemed to be a positive factor. And I had a pastor that I noticed he was having growth in a congregation that had not grown, and I said, what is your, what do you think is a major factor in your growth? What are you doing differently? And he said, well, it's just thank God for disillusioned Southern Baptists. I don't mean to be, I know that's not painful to you, but I said, what? And he said, yeah, he said, they're kind of a pain in the neck because it means you got to waste at least an hour hearing their story about, do you know what that preacher said to me then? And I said, oh, really? That's so interesting. And he said that, and I said, well, I have an idea. Let's put a big sign out front saying, come here, we're better than the Baptist. And he said, Bishop, that's not a good attitude. That's you. But just to say that we were saying for a while, Americans are more conservative. They're going to more conservative, evangelical, demanding churches. Well, we found out Southern Baptist churches grow and decline at about the same rate as Methodist congregations. And factors of the age of the church, the median age of the people who attend the church, those become bigger factors than other factors. And I may be saying the sermon today about how that in many ways we're well positioned denominationally and all. One little thing I think, being a United Methodist today means not worrying too much about General Conference or the general church, staying focused on this congregation and the opportunities God is giving it and the decision it needs to make. So, and again, it's so exciting to see this historic church doing so well. Another very positive thing Memorial's got going for it, I see George out there and all, but you've got some wise older pastors here. And as being a wise older person myself, I think that this provides another resource. As long as we older pastors understand that your younger pastor is facing different challenges than we faced. I start out my courses in the divinity school, and I say to them, you can't serve the same church I served. Now, I'm going to tell you some things I think I've learned, but we're going to have to trust y'all to lead us forward. And so I predict this congregation is just in for some of the most exciting years you've had. And it's great.
Thank you, Bishop Willimon. If y'all will help me say thank you for this time. Inviting Bishop Willimon to come, inviting Sarah White, who's on a conference staff for congregational development, to come is my effort. I feel like I've maxed out the things that I know to make a place better and friendlier and more apt with technology. And so now it's time to bring in experts in other fields, and I'm grateful for y'all coming and for your questions. So we've got about 20 minutes before worship starts. We'll go get set, and thank y'all for coming and participating.